I'm going to show you my method for making twisted wires like this one here that are deformed along a path. I actually have another set of wires just outside over here. I'll isolate these and I'll talk you through the setup, and then I'll build it again from scratch. These wires are deformed along a path, and the thing is I still have this master wire over here to the side, and if I deform the master, that deformation will propagate onto all the references. The first step is to create a spline that goes straight up like this. Go into the segment subobject and just offset it by a tiny amount like that. We'll put a twist modifier on this, let's say for now 1080, which doesn't do anything yet because we need to divide the spline. So let's divide that segment by 60 and then our twist should work. Then you're going to make 3 references, so each one will be rotated by 120 degrees. And then I'll just separate the master and move it to the side. Now we have our master wire on the side and the 3 references here, and we can put unique deformations on each reference so that they're all slightly different to each other. So we can apply noises and we can use FFD and so on. I'll come back to my master for a second and enable viewport rendering for now, but I'm going to use a sweep modifier in the end. I'm going to change the color of these so we can differentiate them. One will be blue, I'll make one pink, and I'll make one green. This is just to make our lives a bit easier for now. So what I'll do is I'll copy this first noise, paste it onto the second wire, give it a different seed and just change the parameters a bit. And then on the green wire I'll paste in the same noise, give it a different seed. But this time I'm going to put on a volume select and I'll shrink it down just to the middle of the wire. And I'll turn on soft selection, making sure I'm using the vertex subobject. So let's just bump this value up to 40. And then I'll put an FFD and I'll just grab the middle control points and shift them out in this direction. And maybe these bottom ones I can shift a little like that. There's going to be some interpenetration. You might not need to worry about that depending on how close your camera will be. If you want, you can take the time to correct it. But for now, I'm just going to say this is okay. Because we have a volume select passing up a vertex subobject selection, we need to put on another volume select, making sure that the object level is selected. So now we have 3 unique wires, and at this point I'll turn off viewport rendering and I'll put on a sweep modifier just before the modifier stacks diverge, and I'll just adjust that thickness. I want to point out an important distinction. We have our sweep modifier on our master, which takes a spline object and makes it a polygonal mesh. So that means our deformations that are above the sweep modifier are acting on geometry vertices rather than spline knots. If we turn off the sweep modifier, one of our wires just disappears. So what's happening there? Let's turn it on again and see which one it is. It's the green wire, which is the one that has the volume select modifiers. So volume select only works on geometry, it doesn't work on splines. Whereas the other modifiers that I put on to deform the wires can operate on both spline knots and geometry vertices. So if I turn off the sweep and play with the noise, you can see that the spline is deforming. And if I turn on the sweep and play with the noise, you can see that it's the geometry that's deforming. So these modifiers work on both splines and geometry, but the volume select requires geometry. It doesn't work on splines. So if I pass a spline object up the stack, it will effectively disappear after the volume select. It just annihilates the subobjects. So we need to have our sweep modifier underneath the deformations. But in general, it's good practice to deform your splines and then generate the geometry from the deformed spline, rather than generating the geometry and then deforming it. Generating geometry from a deformed spline will always give you a uniform cross-section, which is usually what you want. I'll come back to this in a bit and I'll show you how this affects your mesh. I'm going to create some instances of these wires up here. So these are 3 more references of the master wire off to the side. So any changes on this master will propagate to all 6 references now. And I'm going to hide this joint by putting on a sort of cable tie. So I'll just quickly create a circle, move it up, sweep modifier, rectangular cross section, adjust the dimensions as you need. And then you can put on an edit spline modifier above the spline object. And I'll select all these vertices, set them to smooth, and I'm going to refine these segments so I have 8 control points. And then I can move these vertices in. And then on top of the sweep modifier, I'll put an FFD modifier, and that will allow me to close the gaps on the top and the bottom independently, just like this. let's move this cable tie down, and we can delete the top references. We don't need those anymore. I'm going to make a reference of the cable tie, and I'll move the master off to the side. So we have our two master objects here. Then I'm going to take all these references, which is 4 objects in total, and I'll create a group, and I'll just move that pivot to the bottom. And I'll shift the drag and create an instance of the group, and I'll move that up to the right spot. So now we have all our references of the master objects, and you can make as many of these as you want. I'll select all the references and make another group, and then I'm going to apply some global deformation, like a twist. And the purpose of this deformation is to disrupt any visible tiling of the geometry. If we look here around the middle, there's a noticeable feature that sticks out. So the twist modifier will make these features only visible on certain instances, so it'll effectively hide the tiling. At this point we can create a path, and now you can just put a Path Deform modifier on the group, select the path and just adjust the percentage. So let's hide the path. And there you have it. And I'll just show you that our master wire is still in control. If I put an FFD on it, that deformation propagates to the 6 references that are deformed along the path. Now I'm just going to put on an extreme deformation. Remember what I said earlier about deforming splines versus deforming geometry. I'll put the sweep modifier at the very top of the stack after all the deformation, including the Path Deform. And you can see that we have a circular cross section. Just compare that to if I put it underneath the twist and Path Deform, which gives us an elliptical cross section. So sometimes you can get away with this. I made this deformation very extreme just to show this effect. It's important to just be aware of it. And that's it. That's the technique.